Hey guys, today I've got one of the few islands of sanity in an otherwise utter sea of lunacy known as the former Sweden, Ingrid, Carlqvist. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. You know, I changed the name of my country to Absurdistan.
For those of you who don't know you, let me just say that you are a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. You've written many articles there, specifically speaking about the unique circumstances of Sweden. And so I highly recommend that people go check it out. So maybe we could start. I mean, the West in general is suffering from many of the issues that we'll be talking about, but it seems as though the Swedes have taken the lunacy to new levels. Can you break it down for us? What is unique about the Swedish reality that what we're facing today there?
Mm. It's very complicated to understand why we have made these things, but right now we are the country who's taken in most refugees per capita. I mean, Germany has of course taken more, but they are such a big country. I don't know, do they have 80 million inhabitants or something like
Something
that?
like that, yeah.
And Sweden has barely 10. So I actually saw some figures just the other day that since the millennium, we have taken in almost 1 million people to this country, and the Swedish population has decreased with 25,000. So now 30% of the people living in Sweden have some kind of different background. So we are fast going against becoming a minority in our own country.
And the incoming folks are not coming from Vietnam and Haiti and Japan, I assume. They all sort of have one common theme. Can you break it down to us what that theme might be?
Yeah, when we started to become this immigrant country, it was in the 1960s when Sweden was doing very well after World War II, you know, because we had not engaged in the war and we needed workforce. So we encouraged people from Southern Europe, mostly Greece, Italy, and some countries from there. And it worked fine. First of all, they were not so many. It was not a mass immigration. And it worked well because they were Europeans and they wanted to come to Sweden to work. They started to work day one. Then something happened in the 90s. Then we did not need workforce, but they needed us. I don't know why, but the parliament decided that Sweden was not going to be a Swedish country anymore because multiculturalism is the new thing. And they started to have these very, very generous asylum rules. So the people who come now, they are almost all of them Muslims from the Middle East, and also some people from quite a lot of people from Somalia and Eritrea and Afghanistan.
All countries with very rich traditions of liberty, secularism, and freedom, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, people are they don't understand how come so many Afghan people rape women. You know, Afghanistan is the most dangerous country for a woman to live in. Why do the Swedish politicians expect these people to come here and as soon as they set foot on Swedish soil, they will become equal, they will respect women, and it's absolutely crazy. Of course they will not.
Right.
But you know, that's one of the things. I lived in Denmark for a while, and the Danes, they are very nationalistic. You know, they always wave with a red and white flag. And in Sweden, you hardly ever see the Swedish flag. And many Danes said to me, how come that Swedes are not nationalistic? And I really wondered a lot about this question, because I know we are, but we have a very strange way of showing it. And now I have come up with the answer.
Okay, let's hear it.
Swedes, we know that Sweden is the best country in the world. And if you know you're the best, you're not supposed to brag, because that's not nice. So you get it? We are so sure that everybody who comes to Sweden will, of course, understand that this is a fantastic country. And our values, traditions, and culture is the best in the world. So they will, of course, want to become like us. And it worked quite well with the Greeks and the Spaniards and the Italians. But these people, especially from Muslim countries, they don't at all want to become like Swedes. They think we are a crazy people, too liberal, too, open-minded about everything. So they actually want to change. And I've heard from so many people who are Muslims or former Muslims that you can go to any mosque in Sweden and all they will tell you is do not take Swedes as your friends, do not go into their traditions, never celebrate Christmas, and you must never take them as friends. So the last 20 years or so, we have had this flood of people coming from cultures who hate democracy, they hate Western values, they hate women, and think that we are fair game because we don't hide our hair and our arms and legs and so on.
By the way, I'm very offended that you haven't dyed your hair brown right now. Your blonde hair is very triggering to my Middle Eastern background.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but there won't be so many blonde Swedish girls left in a few years.
So, okay, I appreciate your explanation, but I think I might propose some of my own. So, there's a couple of terms that I've coined and or popularized. One is the ostrich brigade. The other one is the castrati brigade. And it seems as though there's been a genuine effort by the Swedish culture to castrate their men, in that there are all these different social engineering programs, the idea of introducing gender neutral pronouns. And as a matter of fact, there is strong scientific data that supports this idea. So for example, Geert Hofstede, who is I think Dutch cross-cultural psychologist, very famous guy, quantifies cultures along various metrics, one of which is how they score on femininity versus masculinity. And of all countries in the globe that have been scored on that dimension, Sweden scores the highest on femininity. Mm-hmm. And so it's not difficult to then take a society that in a sense has collectively rejected many of these traits that we typically would consider to be masculine, and then you take a culture that is very invasive, that is very dominant, that dare I say is very, quote, masculine, and you then are not going to get a very happy mixing of cultures, right?
No. Of course not. I blame feminism as well as I blame stupid politicians and stupid journalists because it's true. They have actually castrated a lot of men. And can you imagine the land of the Vikings? Suddenly we have no men left. They're all, scared of saying something or doing something. And I also heard, because I'm very, very worried about all these attacks on girls at public swimming pools and music festivals. I have not read once of any Swedish guys trying to protect these women.
Well, it would be racist to protect the women, because then you would be stopping non-Swedish men, and that would be racist. Survival is racist. Protecting yourself against sexual assault is a form of racism. And so you want to be tolerant and open yourself up literally to the incoming folks, right?
Mm-hmm. But I have also heard Swedish men say, why should we save these women? They have castrated us. They say that white men are the worst in the world, and so why should we help them? This is what they want to. They stand here with their refugees welcome, and they go along with these guys, and then they get raped. It's not my fault. But I say to them, you cannot... If women have become so stupid that they don't even understand that they are the ones who are going to lose the most on this Islamization of Sweden. If they have become so stupid, you must help them, save them from themselves. And I really actually mean it.
Are there any sort of more like second wave strong feminist voices in Sweden that so women feminists who are fighting back against some of this sort of politically correct lunacy? No.
So few. Nice. They've all, signed up for this third wave of feminism. And, we even have a government who says they have a feminist foreign policy.
Yes, I have. I think I have tweeted about that. Can you tell us what is a feminist foreign policy exactly?
Well, I think it seems like it is recognizing Palestine.
Yes.
A very, very masculine society.
But why is that feminist?
I'm sorry, God, I can't answer that.
It's above your pay grade.
Yeah,
Got you.
really.
Okay, got you.
No, I have no idea. The three minister that works in the foreign office, they're all women. Maybe that's the feminist part. I don't know. It's absolutely crazy. They just, it sounds good. Oh, we are so progressive. The heritage from Olof Palme, and we are a humanitarian superpower, and now we will become a feminist superpower. It's just a lot of crap.
All right, so let's drill down on. I guess the sort of the first big theme I want us to cover is the rampant epidemic of sexual assaults in Sweden. And I thought that before you start answering this, there was a recent statement that came out by, let me just mention who she is, and you'll correct my pronunciation. She's a politician from Stockholm, Barbro Sorman, who, I'm paraphrasing what she said. She said that it is much worse when Swedish men, meaning white, indigenous Swedish men, rape women than when the refugees rape women, because at least the former have been taught all of these values and they've been inculcated with these values. So when they do it, it's really bad. But the poor immigrants who are coming from these foreign values, well, we can't really blame them. Did I summarize her position properly?
Absolutely. And she had to, sort of correct these statements because people got really, really upset with that. But I think she's not alone. I think a lot of feminists, they think in this way, that they think of I don't like to call them refugees, because most of them are not fleeing from war and torture and those stuff. They're economic migrants, but foreigners. Let's call them foreigners. The foreigners, they look at them as victims, as little children. They are never responsible for anything. And that is, I think that is kind of a racism too,
Of course.
The racism of lower expectations.
Soft bigotry of lowered expectations, yes.
Yeah. And this is also why so many of them have become rich by fraud, because we have all this welfare system where you get a lot of money. For example, if you are a family with a lot of children, you get lots and lots of money, even so much money that if you, instead of taking this money, go out and get yourself a job, you will lose. Incredible. That's absolutely crazy. But then if the parents divorce, so then they need 2 apartments. And so many of them do, but of course they don't divorce, just on paper. And then they get paid for 2 apartments and they can rent 1 apartment out. And we have had so many of these, scandals the last years. Millions, billions of kronor is just, flooding away. And that is because they all look at them as children. They're not responsible for their actions. They're not as clever as we are. They don't say that, of course, but that is what they mean. They are not as clever as we are, and maybe they're not. But I think that if you let people in to this society, you have to make very clear what you are supposed to do and not supposed to do. But since we have been taught, not my generation, but, people who are 30 years or younger, they have been taught from daycare that everybody is the same all over the world. There is no such thing as a Swedish culture, Swedish values, and so on. So it's become a mixture of so many bad things. And this what she is saying. I think she actually believes it. But if you believe it, and then you should just say, no more migrants into this country, because we have enough rapists as it is.
So tell us about before I ask you about the rape stats in Sweden, so maybe you could update us on the very, very effective and brilliant strategy devised by the Swedish police of wearing anti-rape bracelets. And apparently the anti-rape bracelets, "don't touch me, it's my property," is not dissuading the rapist. What a shock. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, this Don Eliasson, who is the chief of police in Sweden, he has actually destroyed 2 different authorities in Sweden. And then they gave him a 3rd chance. So now he's out to destroy the police. And he's not a police, of course. He's a politician, and he wants to be close to the power. And he's doing exactly what he thinks that the government want him to do. Feel sorry for the criminals, feel sorry for the migrants and so on. And when he came with this suggestion, I thought Sweden would explode. On Facebook and Twitter, people went crazy. How can you come up with such a stupid idea? First of all, how does a bracelet save any girls from being raped? Second, it was in Swedish. These people, they don't even speak Swedish. Neither do they read Swedish. And in one of the festivals the other weekend, I think, Bråvalla, 3 of the rapists were actually wearing that bracelet. So they do at us.
There was a guy, what is his name? I'm looking for his name. Karsten Nordal Haken. Just to show that this cancer has also spread to some of your Scandinavian colleagues, maybe not as bad as Sweden. He is a Norwegian politician, a man who was raped by a Somali, immigrant or refugee or whatever. And after the guy was deported, he sort of went publicly this is the Norwegian guy, the victim of rape, of sodomy, forced sodomy. He went on publicly to say that how guilty he feels that now this poor Somali is going to be punished by being deported back to Somalia. And I mean, he can't guarantee his safety. So when you've taken your level of empathy to such an extent where the guy who forcibly sodomizes you feel empathy for him, is Scandinavia doomed in general and Sweden in particular, or can the ship be reversed?
Well, I have to believe that we can reverse it, because otherwise I would be so depressed and I don't know if I could go on living. And I am sure we can. And we will, because I still believe there is a Viking inside all of us. But I think it will take a war, maybe. A kind of a civil war, a war against Islam and Western values. I mean, we are already at war. Islam has declared war on Western values a long time ago. It's just the Western politicians refuse to understand, because it's not a war between 2 or 3 countries. So they don't understand that we are at war. But I mean, if we really see, fighting inside the country, people getting killed on a daily basis, and then it will be a lot of blood and horrible things. And after that, I think we will have a new beginning of Sweden. And then we will, I believe, forbid Islam.
Because you think that inherently the Islamic central doctrines are incompatible with some of the foundational tenets of Western liberal secular democracies.
And it's just something I think. It's in the Quran and the Hadiths and everywhere. And you can go to very popular websites where Muslims put questions to high up, mullahs and sheikhs and all what they are called. And they ask them, for example, I live in a Western country and here they have democracy. Is that okay? Is democracy okay in Islam? And they always get the answer, no, it is absolutely not. That is a man-made system made by people for people. That is against Allah's will. And another question, is it okay for me to vote in this democratic election? And they get the answer, well, it could be if you think it will benefit Islam. So, for example, if there is an Islamist party or a special party that has been infiltrated by many Muslims, you can vote for that until that party is in the lead and they take power, and then they will abolish democracy.
Yeah, we have that party in Canada. It's called the Liberal Party.
Yeah, fantastic.
And we have currently our Prime Minister is the castrato-in-chief, who I think feels a very strong affinity with Sweden and is trying to replicate the Swedish model right here in Canada. So maybe before we move on to the next topic, could you tell us any stats that you may have regarding the rape and sexual assaults epidemiology in Sweden?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I wrote about this in Gatestone because a 1975, the same year as the Swedish parliament decided that Sweden was going to become a multicultural country. Nobody knew about that at the time, but at the same year, the crime statistics started. So you can actually see in 1975, I think 400 rapes were reported to the police, and last year it was somewhere around 7,000.
Wow.
So
And you, because I had heard that by some, politically correct rule or law, you're not supposed to keep track of the identity of the rapist. So then how do we know that they come from this country or that religion? How does one make that match?
because there have been some studies, where the researcher can go inside, the police report, and they can find it out, but it is not available. It's not really forbidden, but it's not available to normal people, and nobody ever talks about it. And the last study that I know of was made in 2005. So after that, of course, it has increased a lot, and that's why they never talk about it, and the journalists never write about it because they say it has no relevance. I think it has a significant relevance for these young girls, especially young girls who have been brainwashed with the idea that all people are the same. There are no difference between Swedish guys and Somali guys. So they think, a lot of them, they think that they can go with the Somali guy to his house to have a cup of tea. And then she can say, oh, sorry, I changed my mind. I don't want to have sex. And then he will say, like the Swedish guy will say, okay, sorry about that. Because she will get raped. But they don't know this because the authorities, the journalists have all hidden all these facts from people. And I think that's a crime against these Swedish girls.
Well, wasn't there I don't know if he's the Stockholm head of police, who specifically put out an edict saying that you should not sort of report or specify when these sexual assaults happen. I guess he was referring to in Stockholm what the identity or the background of the rapists were, correct?
Yeah, because this is so crazy. The politicians and the journalists, they have this idea that Swedish people, even though we are by any standards very peaceful, we don't hit each other very often, and Swedish men don't rape very often. They think that if Swedish people will get knowledge of this, if they understand that it is the foreigners, the immigrants who do the rapes, the murders, not all of them, of course, but they are grossly overrepresented. The Swedes will go out into the streets and they will start, killing foreigners.
Well,
That is absolutely absurd.
although the reality is that if this continues, that's what's going to happen in the future. In other words, I've repeatedly said, as somebody who comes from a very violent background, I escaped the Lebanese Civil War. I know what house-to-house fighting is and what people who used to be neighbors, how they turn on each other. I've always said that, look, there are really two possibilities. To sort of summarize it very simply, there are two possibilities that the West is facing. Either you solve the problem today peacefully, or you solve the problem down the line without peace and with a lot of violence. The issue is not going to remain this way. The world is static. The world moves. The world is organic. People adjust. People wake up. People come out of their stupor. And when they do, the things that you don't want to happen or you don't believe will happen. And so, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they have been calling us racists now for so many years, the establishment. And even though Swedes are always, in the bottom of these leagues of racism, Swedes are not racist. But we who are, speaking our mind about mass immigration, Islam, and how it's taking away democracy and free speech from Sweden, we have been called racist so many times that first of all, the word doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just like calling someone a stupid person or so. But what they will actually do with this, they will create racists. Because first of all, if you're being called racist every day, some people will think, well, maybe I am a racist, or maybe I will just become one because I'm so tired of this. And if they go on filling our country with these dangerous people, and they go on giving them a lot of tax money, our tax money, to have them to have more and more organizations working on having Sweden Islamized and taking power in Sweden. One day we will all become racist because we will say we don't want anyone with a black hair or black beard in this country because we cannot trust them. There are some who are very good, but it's like the bowl of M&Ms. 5 of them are poisonous. Would you like some, Gad? Would you like? No, you wouldn't. And we will come to that stage when people say, we don't want them here. We want blonde, blue-eyed Swedes whom we can trust. So they are actually creating what they say they don't want.
Well, I think that's, by the way, your M&M example is one that I've also used, and I'm preparing a future Sad Truth clip that actually uses this exact analogy or metaphor. But anyways, this is a cognitive trap that I've often spoke about. When people have a difficulty understanding statistical statements. So, for example, if you say that men are taller than women, biologically speaking, that's an undeniable fact. Yet there are millions of women who are taller than millions of men, even though that doesn't in any way negate the original statement, which holds throughout the population. So I think the same sort of cognitive bias happens when you're speaking about Islam, right? On average, it is true that Islamic societies and people who come from those cultures are going to have certain values that are antithetical to secular, liberal, democratic values. But most people want to be decent. Most people want to feel that they're not racist, that they're tolerant. And so they could each go to their private memory and point to endless, wonderful people who come from those cultures, who are peaceful, who don't do any of the things that we're talking about here. And then that becomes the memory trace that guides their thinking. And I think that's fundamentally one of the most difficult issues we're facing, which is Islam has tenets that are incompatible. It's as clear as the existence of gravity, that are incompatible with Western values, and yet we could all point to endless, lovely, peaceful, kind, tolerant Muslims. But until we recognize this cognitive bias, many people will continue to fall victim to this bias. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think it was Brigitte Gabriel who said so brilliantly when she was asked by a Muslim female student at the university. She said, why are you talking such rubbish about Islam? Most Muslims are very peaceful and tolerant. And she has this brilliant answer. I can't quote it, but it's about the peaceful minority is of no interest. No, the peaceful majority, of course. Most Germans were not bloodthirsty Nazis out to kill Jews. But that didn't change the fact that Nazism is a horrible ideology.
Exactly.
And she gave a lot of examples, from Soviet Union and so on. And we have to make people understand this. And the peaceful majority is of no interest as long as it is the very radical minority who has the ear of the government, who gets the money, who are those who talk about Islam. Because of all these peaceful Muslims, I've met a lot of them. Have you ever heard them having a speech somewhere? Have you ever heard them tell other Muslims that we must make a reformation or a revolution, and we must, take all these horrible, hateful verses out of the Quran? No, they don't. And I am sure that if an Islamic party gets in power here, most Muslims maybe would say that was a bad thing because we really like the Swedish democracy. But if they have the choice, are you with us, the Muslims, or will you stand with the Swedes the Swedes and say that we want democracy back, what do you think they will do? I'm sure that most of them would say, well, Allah is almighty, and maybe I will go to hell if I don't say they are imams, they are powerful, they say I will go to hell. And because that's the way they've been brought up. So, yeah, I think people need to understand that.
Well, and I think, I mean, to take your percentage of 5%, I mean, and I've made this comment previously, but it's worth repeating. I mean, yes, for example, when you're bringing in, say, the Syrian refugees to Canada, as our castrato-in-chief is doing currently, well, one could argue, well, what percentage of the 25,000 that are coming in might be in any way linked to ISIS? And that number will be very small. But that, to me, is a terribly insignificant number, actually. Well, the more important number is, out of the 25,000 people, what percentage of those people hold values that couldn't be more different than the foundational values that we call dearest to us? What do they think about homosexuals? What do they think about women's clitorises? What do they think about Jews? What do they think about freedom of speech and freedom of conscience? And study after study after study and 1,400 years of history suggests that in that case, it's a large majority of folks from those countries who abhor all those values. So I don't care about the 3 or 7 or 27 ISIS guys. Yes, we need to keep track of them. But there's a much bigger problem, and that is that many folks will undeniably change the character of our societies if they hold those values. And as long as we're unable to have some magic machine that allows us to look into people's hearts and people's brains, then we have a problem, right? Because I don't know, when I ask you, do you support liberal values, whether when you say, oh yeah, of course, how do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know that you don't? So that's, I think, the fundamental problem.
And I actually, Swedes, they don't like people who lie. The one thing that can make a politician, lose his job is if he's being caught lying. That's a very deep value for Swedes and Scandinavians, I guess. But I talked to a lot of imams and people from Muslim congregations and so on. And one of them, he said, this is very interesting. Well, because we asked, but you don't always tell the truth, do you? You have been saying to this authority that you need money for this and that, but then you use money for something else. Well, the truth is so valuable, so you cannot use it as you please. Right. Because if this truth might make things harder for Islam to come into power, that would be a bad truth to say. So, and that is more important than them feeling ashamed of lying.
And of course, there are codified passages in the holy books of Islam that exactly speak to this, right? In other words, You're allowed to lie in the furtherance of Islam under certain conditions. And I can give you personal anecdotes. As somebody whose mother tongue is Arabic, I have I'll give you two stories. Number one, I engaged with a lot of people who are of that background, who don't know of my background. I'm Lebanese Jewish, and who, of course, when they don't know that you may not share their heritage, or when they think that you share their heritage, then they will speak very openly with you about certain things. And I wish that I had a tape recorder to share some of those things. It's not pretty. Now, that doesn't mean that every single person does it, and of course, most are very nice, but I can assure you that I have had those conversations in Arabic, and it would make most people's skin crawl. The second thing I was going to say is that you could take this exact same person, you could take Tariq Ramadan, who I think is much more dangerous than Osama bin Laden,
of course,
because he is sophisticated and he speaks with a beautiful French accent and a beautiful English accent, and he's a professor at a distinguished university and so on. And when he speaks from this side of his mouth in French or English, and then turns and speaks from this side of his mouth in Arabic, and I speak Arabic, so you can't say I don't understand, I didn't, it's misquoted, it's mistranslated. It's not pretty, and there's a million of these examples. There are organizations that do nothing but translate these things. And usually when I share these things with people, what do you think is the first reaction? Well, of course, this organization is run by Jews, it's run by Zionists, right? So it's an impenetrable wall of irrationality. And at sometimes you think that you can't win, because how could you win against those who can't use discourse in the way that you're used to using discourse, right?
No, absolutely. And it's like the Swedish authorities, I've been calling a lot of them and saying, how do you know that these Muslim organizations tell you the truth? They say they want to work against racism and they want to work for peace. But how do you know if that is true? Oh, we can't know that, but of course, why wouldn't we trust them? Because that is what we are used to in Sweden. People don't lie. Some do, but normally you can trust what people tell you. So, and if they should start, behaving differently towards Muslim organizations than, for example, Jewish or Christian organizations, that would be racist.
Incredible. So, since we're talking about the Jewish angle, let's move to this issue. Sweden used to have a vibrant Jewish community. I think many of them were focused in Malmo, but recently there's been a huge exodus of Jews from Sweden. I'm assuming that most are fleeing the Amish, the Jains, and the atheists.
Of course, we are so horrible against them. No, we have had not so many stories because the Jews in Sweden, they don't talk about this. And I think that's a shame because they are really the ones who know what it's like to be persecuted by Muslims. And but they speak when they come to Israel. Then you could read in the Jerusalem Post, for example, about people who says, I had to leave Malmo, I had to leave Sweden because there are so many Muslim immigrants that they spit at us, they call us horrible names, we are afraid to show the Star of David.
But they're not against Jews, they're only against Zionism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
I get tons of that. I recently had an exchange with a woman who that didn't go too well, where it was the typical case, which is, no, I love the Jews. And then she gets into the whole Israel thing, but then her whole position is nothing but instance after instance of grotesque Jew hatred. But there is a cover that now these guys have, because they can always say, no, Jews, I love them. Jews are cool. It's just Israel, goddamn Israel. But Jews, I love them. Right?
Yeah, but I mean, that's just stupid. I mean, we all know who know something about Islam. We know that Muslims are always above non-Muslims. And I know that they especially hate Jews, but they also hate Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and everybody who is not a Muslim. They just want us for one thing, to work and pay the jizya taxes so that they don't have to work. So they don't want us all to convert, because they need some slaves. But I mean, what is the big problem, I think, is that there are big Jewish organizations working together with the government to have more and more mass immigration. And, when Jews say you have to be tolerant, remember Holocaust, then people listen. The Swedish government listen, the authorities listen, the organizations listen. And that is really a big problem, I think. And I've been working on this. A story about this. Is it because they are so afraid?
Yeah, so
there is, of course, some truth in that, but it is also a kind of I can't explain it, because I have asked them, would you welcome Nazi refugees? And then it becomes difficult. No, but if they come from a country where they say that all Nazis must be killed, and they come here, and it becomes very difficult.
Can I offer an explanation?
Yeah.
I think it really comes from the psychology of the dhimmi, right? I mean, are you familiar with that concept? Right?
Absolutely.
So for those who aren't, let me just kind of briefly explain it. A dhimmi is a not second class, a third class citizen under Islamic rule, whereby typically people of the book, Ahl al-Kutub, the people in Christianity and Judaism who also have a monotheistic tradition, could be under circumstances not forced to convert and not killed, allowed to live under Islamic protection. But then, of course, there is a price for that. And depending on the context, it's either very nasty or not. But the rules are very clear as codified in the Quran. You live as a dhimmi. You pay a jizya, as you said, a protection tax, which, by the way, a lot of folks from those countries refer to the generous social welfare system
Yeah.
as the contemporary jizya. I mean, it's
Yeah.
extraordinary. They say it to me, okay? They
Yeah.
say it to me privately. But in any case, and so what I think happens to the Jewish mindset is this kind of defeated dhimmi status. Maybe if I just be quiet. In French, there's an expression, which I'll say it in French and then I'll translate it in English. Sois belle et tais-toi. Be pretty and be quiet. Okay? And so that's the Jew, right? I will tolerate you, Jew, but sit quietly. Don't wear the Star of David. Don't make noise. Demonstrate, right? And so that mindset becomes infused in the Jewish reality. And so one of the ways that I could show that I'm not, please don't fear me, I'm not a bad guy, is to always be carrying the water bottle for the ones who are otherwise going to behead you down the line. What do you think of this explanation?
I think it's a very good explanation and probably very true. But what will happen if you go on being a dhimmi? Then we will lose everything. And I'm really, really worried that when the Vikings wake up, and if they see, okay, our country has been destroyed with Muslim mass immigration by these politicians, these journalists, and the Jews.
Right.
They will say, who must we get rid of? The politicians, the journalists, and the Jews.
Right. And the Jews won't put up as dangerous a fight as some of the other folks, so then we could kick them around, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's see if for sort of our last segment, we could see if we could come up with some solutions, if there are any. And so I guess my first question, which I've asked many of my guests that have been on the show that speak to these issues, is how do we navigate through the realities that we're talking about, yet maintain our humanity, which is that many of the people who are fleeing these zones and many of the people who want to come to Sweden and Canada are perfectly lovely. Is there a way for us to maintain our humanity, stay humane, have reasonably open borders, but recognize these fears? How do we navigate through this?
You know, it's very difficult because as long as we have welfare states, and a lot of Swedes want to keep the welfare state, we will be a magnet for these people. You know, they don't come here with airplanes from the Middle East. They walk or they go by bus or train, and they're all through a lot of countries which they reject. Why? Because they want to go to the Swedish welfare state. And that's not fair. It's not fair, and it's not human to Swedes, to Swedish taxpayers, to say, okay, they want your money, so you must give it. We pay very high taxes, you know, and we did it gladly because we knew that when my old mother gets old and she needs hospital care and everything, she will have it for free, and my children will have good school. Now we see my old mother doesn't get this care anymore. I just read today in a newspaper about a woman who lost her baby because there was no place in the hospital for her to give birth. So they sent her home, and they thought that she could wait to the next day. And when she came back the next day, the baby was dead. This is happening in Sweden because of this mass immigration, because these people don't speak Swedish and they're not interested in learning Swedish, they're not interested in working, and I think it cannot always only be our responsibility to be humane. And I think that what we need to do in this situation is to put pressure on the neighboring countries. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Dubai, they're rich, rich, rich countries. They could take all these refugees. And if there is a crisis in Norway or Denmark, I assure you, we will take all of them.
Right.
Gladly.
And right now, I think there are no refugees that have been accepted into any of the Gulf countries, which is really extraordinary, right? These are their co-religionists, right? They're part of the Ummah. I mean, by definition, they're part of the great nation of Islam. They speak the same language, they have the same culture, they share the religion, but they don't allow a single individual, but a completely different culture with different values, thousands of kilometers away. Somehow it is incumbent on them, meaning Sweden, to exhibit endless empathy and nurturance. What I wanted to do actually is introduce an evolutionary biological argument to what we're talking about. So this is in my scientific work. I'm an evolutionary behavioral scientist, and so there are two Darwinian modules. One is called kin selection. The idea is that, I could extend my genes not only by directly reproducing children, but also by investing in my nephews and my brothers, and so because they share genes with me, right?
Yeah.
And so there are a million studies that have looked at how not only humans, but across species, organisms are very attuned to these types of relationships. So even, for example, when you have parents who have biological and adoptive children, they will tend to invest more in their biological children, right? And let's take another, and then I'm going to link it to this issue in a second. Reciprocity is this mechanism of, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, right? I jump into the river to save you with the expectation that later, if I need your help, you'll jump into the river to save me. And we expect of social species to engage in these types of agreements. Well, I think both of these mechanisms, and I'll probably do a eventual sad truth clip on what I'm talking about now. Both of these mechanisms are completely violated in the context of what we're discussing. Number one, it is not natural for people to exhibit infinite empathy to people that are thousands of miles away, that are as removed as possible from their in-group mindset, right? That's just not how human nature is built, right? No. So you are forcing a reality that is not consistent with human nature. And secondly, the idea of reciprocity, I look forward to the day where Syrian society will reciprocate to Swedes. It's not going to happen. So the mechanism is always unidirectional, right? The West, the white man, always, right? In my case, I came from Lebanon. Well, I hope that I've done a lot to reciprocate by wearing my Canadian identity proudly, hopefully by returning the favor of having been allowed to come to Canada, by speaking highly of Canada, by taking great personal and professional risks to defend Canadian values. And so in that sense, I'm reciprocating the wonderful welcome that Canada gave me when I escaped Lebanon. But the reality is that most of the folks in question and most of these cultures will never be in a position to reciprocate, and hence you have a breakdown of the relationship. Wow, that was one hell of a theory.
Yeah, and it's a very good one.
You like
and
that?
I think that this has become even more horrible in Sweden because, as I started to say, that we have this belief that we are the best country in the world. So everybody who comes here, they need our help, and we cannot go around bragging and saying, you must become a Swede, because that would not be nice. They will understand it. And these two cultures, so different. These people come here and they see weak people. We see us as lovely, inviting, not very strong. You can come when you have understood this and so on. They come, they see weak people. See, they give us everything. They gladly pay the year, even though we are not in power yet. So they need us. They want us because they are so weak. And it's our duty to take over this country.
As a matter of fact, the discourse that I've heard, both personally with some folks from these backgrounds and also in Arabic, in speeches and so on, they view Western society as a female, if you'd like, that is to be mounted, right? So a lot of the values that, the Swedes would consider to be the marks of a wonderful person. And I actually touched on this with Nikolai Sennels when he was talking about the difference between the criminal minds of indigenous Danes versus the criminal minds of the Muslim refugees who are in Denmark. You really saw this exact point that I'm going to talk about next, which is that in many cases, the exact value that is considered wonderful and to be commended in one culture is precisely the one that you detest and to view as weak and submissive in the other culture. And so you can't have that mixing. It doesn't work, right?
No, it doesn't work. But the problem is that so many are still in denial. We are so few that have understood this and are brave enough to talk about it. So we have all these governments, these politicians, these journalists. They are absolutely, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear this. That is racist. Everybody is the same. Culture is of no importance, and so on and so on. So we have so much work to do, Gab.
So what about as we wrap up, and hopefully maybe we could end it with some optimism. I know now some will say it's not optimism because it is the rise of the far right, it is the rise of the Nazis, but in many places in Europe, we are now starting to see people waking up, and in some cases there is bad discourse, but in most cases it's hardly far right. I mean, Geert Wilders, people pretend that he is a Nazi, yet, you know, he walks around, he loves Jews, he loves gays, he loves women, he loves all of the things that we would consider liberal, but he is a far-right Nazi KKK extremist. Now, in Sweden, you've got the Swedish Democrats. I think one of the prominent guys is Kent. What is his name again? Kent.
Ekeroth.
Okay. How are they doing in the polls? Could they take power? Could the ship be redressed through a peaceful political process?
Yeah, this is very interesting because they have been so denounced for so many years by all the other parties. So it's no use if they are left or right. There are no real right-wing parties in Sweden, but anyway, they call themselves right. They were all saying that the Sweden Democrats, they are Nazis, they are fascists, they are racist, they are the most horrible scum. But now, you know, after last year, when we had 163,000 asylum seekers in 1 year, there is not a village in Sweden that doesn't have an asylum house now. So everybody sees the problem. Everybody gets affected. Everybody knows someone who's been raped or you know, abused or beaten up and so. So in November, they suddenly decided to introduce border controls. So, and now, just the other week, they took a decision on much stricter asylum rules in Sweden. Now, I think from now on, Sweden will have the strongest. It's not easy now, and because we are this consensus culture now, almost all of them have changed their mind. Just a year ago, we were supposed to open our hearts and we must pay for all this because we are a humanitarian superpower. And now everybody says, well, this was too much. And the Sweden Democrats, they say, oh, this is what we've been telling you for 10 years. And now you're taking all our policies and you're making them into law. Yeah, but that was a different thing because you are racist. But you're doing exactly the same. Yeah, but that's different. So I think that part of what has happened now is that the Sweden Democrats are going a bit down in the polls because many people, they actually believe that they are Nazis. So they are happy now that the right-wing parties say, oh, we want this too. Okay, then I can vote for them again.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I've had several people on my show that would be typically some of the most reviled people in this general landscape, Tommy Robinson and Robert Spencer, who probably have worse reputations, unfounded reputations, but worse reputations than the Swedish Democrats. And you can't imagine the number of people who've written to me, either privately or posted public comments, and they've said, I can't believe it. For 10 years, I've been hearing about these guys, that they are the most vile, fascist, illiberal Nazis, and then I heard them speak on your show, and I can't believe that I bought into all this. And so I think fundamentally this really comes from what I call cognitive laziness, right? Most people are too busy, as I've explained before, going about their daily lives, right? Most people are not Ingrid and Gad and are going to put themselves forward to fight these big fights. You know, I've got to worry about tonight's party, and my daughter is getting married next week, and I've got to graduate university, and there's this really pretty girl that I'm going after at the grocery store. And so let somebody else worry about this. All I need to be told is what to think. And if you tell me that Robert Spencer is a Nazi and I should avoid him, good enough for me. You must be telling the truth. Let's move on. He's an evil pig. And so I think that's the problem, is that you need to get people sufficiently engaged to do the homework on these issues. And that's why it's so important in the grand battle of ideas to have things like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube open and not have any obstacles, because if we are unable to provide an alternate discourse, then the other side wins and we're doomed, right?
Of course. So that's what I tell everybody. I mean, we can all do something. Not all people are so brave that they want to, go out and say what they think, but there is always something you can do. And I tell people nowadays, talk to your family, talk to your colleagues, to your friends, to your neighbors, and talk about feelings. Because we, on my side, we have been going on for so many years with statistics and facts and reports and economics and so on. And the left has been talking about children dying in the middle, the Mediterranean and so on. So start talking about feelings. Tell them, ask them, how does it feel that your old mother can't buy food because her pension is so low? How does it feel that your children come home from school and they speak Swedish with a foreign accent? How does it feel? How does it feel? And people will say, it feels horrible. It's horrible. What happened to my Sweden, to my country? So there's a beginning. Then you can start fill them with facts and statistics and economics and everything. And then they will wake up. And that's the way to do it, I think.
Wonderful. Excellent way to end. Are there any projects that are not yet public that you might want to promote before we wrap things up?
I think that people should go to Gatestone and read my articles about the Islamization of Sweden. 3 has been published and the 4th is on its way, and I'm working on more because I'm really digging into this, showing people, but they are long, it's a long article, a lot of facts, and so I will also do videos about this to, talk to the sentiment and make people feel something, but really read those articles, because this is the most fundamental question of all. Is Islam compatible with democracy? And when you have read my articles, you will know the answer. No, it is not. And then you can start thinking about how do we solve that?
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Stay on the line. I'm going to stop the taping. I will put a link to the Gatestone Institute, and hopefully that will make it easier for people to go check it out. Thank you so much, Ingrid. Absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, God.